ti si vede.
Va bene, ok. Sorry for, okay, welcome to everyone. I'm not sure that everything is working, but I think that we can start, otherwise it's not so beautiful. So thank you for joining us. I know that my camera is not working, but it's not a problem. I just want to introduce Monsignor Paglia, who is the president of the Pontifical Academy Pro-Life, and I asked him to make the first introduction to the launch of Genius Vitae project. Monsignor Paglia, it's up to you.
Okay, thank you, dear Professor Magatti. Thank to the speakers involved in this presentation, and thank to all the participants at this event in which we present Genius Vitae Universitas Experientiae. Your presence here today is a good news, a sign of hope for the human life, especially in this time marked by this terrible pandemic. Okay. The project was launched about 1 year ago as a partnership between the Vatican's Pontifical Academy for Life and the Anthropology of Religion and Cultural Change Research Center at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart of Milan. The idea behind the project is that human life cannot be reduced either to a mere object of theoretical discourse or to a simple technical scientific object, which can be manipulated and reproduced at will. On the contrary, human life is characterized by a peculiar concreteness and uniqueness that keeps it continually in balance between excess and limit. Pope Francis indicated this perspective to the Academy for Life in his letter sent in occasion of 20th anniversary of the Academy. Speaking about the way we have to appreciate the meaning of human life, he wrote that we need, and I quote, to avoid reducing life merely to a biological concept or a universal abstraction divorced from relationships and from history. The primordial reality of our flesh proceeds and makes possible all further consciousness and reflection, preventing us from thinking that we are the source of your own existence. The end of the quotation. Genius Vitae is focused on two privileged forms of experience of human life. We can be understood as two frontiers. The first frontier is that of fragility and marginality, declined through the plurality of forms of poverty, loneliness, exclusion, and illness. The second frontier is that of mystery and the transcendence, which is presented through the forms of spirituality, prayer, pilgrimage, contemplation, and art. It is precisely by inhabiting these two frontiers that the human being can regenerate his life and that of the world. Therefore, Genius Vitae is innovative in its methods as well. In fact, it is based on the collection and the dissemination of experiences that are concretely capable not only of restarting the lives of many women and men of our time, but also of generating a new knowledge, which in turn inspires new good practices. This perspective is certainly based on the original core of Christian genius, which has been able to unfold in the course of history in a dynamic and vital form, with a continuous tension towards the search for the fullness of the human life and the unexplored ways to make it flourish. Experiences that are inspired by the good news, which directly and indirectly speaks to the women and men of our time, stimulating original and concrete responses that meet the demand for life that human beings constantly express. And yet, the same attitude may be found in many other groups and initiatives, wherever the human being accepts to be exposed to the constitutive fragility of human life. That is why Genius Vitae has deep universalistic aim to talk and to cooperate with all those who care with life at its extremes. The Genius Vitae project thus introduces a remarkable innovation in the framework of the activities of the Pontifical Academy for Life, in line with what indicated by Pope Francis, urging to take care of all life and of all lives. The Pope recently reminded us this point in his encyclical Brothers All, where he explicitly points out in a shared vision of history the possibility of defying that the individualism that infects our lives, the true virus of the 21st century. Starting from the concreteness and richness of the experiences gathered, make us of a plurality of points of view and narrative languages, Genius Vitae can inaugurate a new way of talking about life in the contemporary world. Stories gathered in the Genius Vitae website will support the communication and the training processes that the project intends to develop. In this way, Genius Vitae is going to offer an original contribution to the growth of a living knowledge that is released from multiple significant experiences capable of arousing new visions and responding to the challenges of the history we live in. The goal is to create a new form of circulation, sedimentation, and development of that knowledge grounded in the concreteness of human experience, a living and embodied knowledge which contemporary time need desperately. Looking at the future, Genius Vitae will be confronted with a new challenge, working in the research and experimentation of new teaching methods, innovative training tools, different spiritual languages, so as to be able to favor a broad and dynamic process of collective learning about human life. We have a big work to do. Thank you. And for me, it's a really great pleasure to participate at this beginning. And we could say Buon Natale to Genius Vitae. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monsignor Paglia, for your words, for your welcome speech. We are very grateful to start together this adventure. This is an adventure, and I think that as any adventure, the final is not assured, but this is the good of life. Exactly. And everyone wants to do its best to reach the goals that together have fixed. And now we listen to Professor Chiara Giaccardi, which is a member of the Catholic University. She's a professor there, who introduced the framework of the project, so we can understand exactly what Genius Vitae wants to be. Professor Giaccardi.
Thank you, Mauro, and good evening to everyone. And thank you so much for being here with us in that time of Advent. We are very pleased to share this project with you. We really believe in its value, as we see it an opportunity to renew our understanding of life, as well as our capacity to generate and share knowledge and to act humanly in today's world. But first, a short premise on the present situation is needed, a premise regarding modernity. We are facing the third huge global shock in 20 years, after the Twin Tower attack in 2001 and the financial crisis in 2008. None of the three can be considered independent on how the processes of globalization have taken shape within the dominant techno-economic framework. Despite the success achieved in terms of better well-being, democracy, and freedom, Western modernity faces today a series of tensions and contradictions. The increasing development of technical and scientific means and the extension of the market into every domain of human existence produce an impressive growth of systemic power, but fragility as well. On the other hand, scientific and technological advancements pursue a limitless intent to exceed any biological limit, up to a total equivalence between fabricating and generating. From birth to death, every aspect of life is submitted to a ceaseless process of measurement, control, and productivity. On the other hand, an increasing number of human lives are treated as byproducts of a system that does not tolerate vulnerabilities and imperfections. Whole segments of humanity are left aside as simple waste due to their inefficiency. They are considered as a threat to our well-being, as a slave labor force, or even as mere providers of spare parts to repair the bodies of those who can afford to pay, and that is profoundly inhuman. Life cannot be regarded as an object at the disposal of a limitless techno-scientific development that fosters and exploits inequalities. In this sense, transhuman and inhuman represent the opposite poles of the same process of a limitless expansions that affect our very living experience. Along the present path, emergency due to environmental issues, zoonosis, migration, and many other factors are only destined to grow. Maybe it is not by chance that the pandemic has hit the most developed countries the hardest. Fragility is the other side of power. Growth cannot be infinite, if not at the price of exploitation of the planet and fragilization of increasing share of the population. Today, more than ever, we need to recognize the limits of our model and to promote a different understanding of human life as the condition of a more integral human development. New forms, more able to host life in its fullness. A broader spectrum of languages and style of communication, capable not so much of defining as of opening horizons. And Last but not least, new methods of education and formation free from any theory-practice dualism are most needed. Genius Vitae is a breaking new ground project that intends to positively counter any techno-scientific reductionism by which human life is treated as a mere available and disposable object. But there is also a more subtle way to mortify life, even when we intend to defend it, by treating it as a mere object of discourse, and specifically a discourse of identity, one that distinguishes one group from the others in the public arena of the battle of ideologies. The project Genius Vitae is meant to escape both the techno-scientific, techno-economical, and the ideological reduction of life to an object, one that someone can claim to possess against others. Vitae is a subjective rather than objective genitive, and the approach we propose here intends to avoid and contrast the traditional dualist perspective, which Romano Guardini considers, I quote, the original metaphysical sin. Dualism is a sin, is a metaphysical sin. Life is a force of bonding and transformation. It acts in a negentropic direction as a dynamic of unification and differentiation at the same time, while the manipulative stance, either technically or ideologically, enforce entropy, fragmentation, de-differentiation. The first step then is an attempt to start from the concreteness of human life, simultaneously made up of overabundance and limits, of fragility and transcendence. Life is love, say Lev Tolstoy. Learning by life means learning by love. Love is life. Everything that I understand only because I love. Everything is, everything exists only because I love. End of quote. Genius Vitae is the attempt to develop a new epistemology based on that ontology. And so what is life in this perspective? Despite their increasing power, the force of life stands above all the attempts to reduce human beings to a biological and therefore disposable material. Overabundance is indeed the best feature to qualify life, in opposition to any anthropological reductionism. The dynamics of continuous self-transcendence are capable to bring into the war a novelty and constitute the hermeneutic principle of human life, urging human beings to be open to others, the unexpected, and the plurality of life. This dynamic emerges strongly from and in the constitutive tension between the historical forms of social life and life itself. On the one hand, life can only be experienced through instituted form. On the other hand, these forms cannot but be aware of their partiality concerning the always exceeding force of life. Only within this tension, original and sustainable solutions can be, and in many cases are, imagined and realized due to the creative interplay among material needs and search for meaning, awareness of limits, and desire for the infinite. The risk of rigidity and more radically of the unlimited power of regulation upon all aspects of human life, as in the surveillance society, can be avoided by recognizing and sustaining this self-transcending, fertile movement of life. And the second keyword is experience. Experience is indeed the fundamental sphere in which we can encounter the overabundance of life, both at the personal and social level. The same word experience contains the root pera, that means beyond, poras, that means passage, door, and peras, that means limit. Experience is then etymologically connected to the idea of a passage. It implies uncomfortable movements like unsettling, leaving behind, losing control. The other, in the form of challenges, situations, people, summons us, and we get involved in a process we cannot foresee, let alone dominate. We are both active in as much as ready to engage, and passive as embedded in unchosen conditions and carried by life itself way beyond our projects. Life cannot be reduced to a mere object of discourse. Perhaps a new attitude is necessary today. Learning from rather than on life, speaking from rather than about life. Experience is precisely the dynamics of participation, involvement, and reflexivity from which a fresh way of looking, knowing, telling, and acting can originate. A piece of knowledge from within can be able to both complement and set a positive limit to the detached attitude of scientific knowledge and technical manipulation. Learning in and from life means putting ourselves in a position of openness, contemplation, adventure, thanks to which we can reach something beyond ourselves, gaining rather than producing a knowledge not an alternative, but complementary to the dominant one, cooperating rather than controlling life, leaning on rather than exploiting its force is alike to having faith, that is, feeling part of something infinitely wider, able to enrich our beings. Two borders in particular are privileged seats of experience as open to other than I, the one of transcendence and the one of fragility. Two margins where overabundance and limit coexist and feed one another. And so a few words about these two boundaries. The experience of transcendence is closely related to contemplation and openness to infinity. Staying on this border opens to the sense of things, revitalizes the desire for a plenitude that cannot be satisfied by any possession, augments our sensitivity, imagination, understanding, well beyond any technical solution. At the same time, it feeds our capacity of acting effectively, since contemplation and action are profoundly related, nurturing each other. Fragility is where we met the naked life, especially when the human being is hurt in flesh or soul, little, poor, ill, foreign, abandoned, discarded. By definition, fragility stays on the border of social life, where what is inadequate is confined. And yet, even in situations of extreme weakness and deprivation, life is capable to flourish, breaking commonplaces and presumptions. In this sense, the fragile other is always a provocation towards the human willpower, sustained by the technical system. On these two borders, in every corner of the world, the human experience continues to bloom. Limit and overabundance coexist in a generative tension of reciprocity. By facing these experiences, human life can overcome its closure, recalling its capacity to face in a positive, original, concrete way the challenges of the human condition in our lives. And now a few words about the project. The real challenge is to avoid these experiences remaining scattered fragments, being rather shared and circulating, and thus encouraging new forms of knowledge, new languages, new educational styles. It is crucial, therefore, to give these experiences a voice so that they can stimulate, inspire, and mobilize others. To foster this process, Genius Vitae project aims to generate a new form of narration and knowledge accumulation and circulation, directly gathered from the experiences lived by those who are more exposed to the two borders of transcendence and fragility. Experiences allow a new understanding of today's question and open new inclusive ways of solution otherwise impossible. The goal of the project is to show that life experienced on these two borders can shape a shared universal knowledge, even if grounded on singular experiences. A concrete, living, and most needed understanding of the human condition, complementarily interacting with the techno-scientific frame and able to speak to the contemporary humankind. Rooted in the concreteness of life experience, born and developed all over the world, Genius Vitae collects and orders, through interview and direct observation, the modalities through which the two borders of transcendence and fragility are inhabited. To promote shared knowledge, the website has been designed where the different experience can be accessible through multiple languages, text, videos, photograph, visual art, and so on. And the direct contribution of different subjects, promoters, witnesses, external researchers, artists, philosophers, theologians, and so on, can be available. The website, in turn, aims at becoming the starting point of new processes of training, education, cultural elaboration, strong to face the mainstream culture and positively contribute to it. It also intends to address alliances between subjects and groups, and it can in turn contribute to the birth of new initiatives that can flourish on the two borders all over the world. In conclusion, from the perspective of the mastery over life, we are destined to increase fragility and dependency on the technical system. From the prospect of contemplation, paradoxically, we can grow in creativity and freedom, as well as fraternity, as Romano Guardini effectively told us. And I quote, "Life is fruitfulness, and the more life is alive, the greater is its strength to present what does not yet exist." And so good luck to our project, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chiara, for your introduction. Now we have a clip from the website.
Jérusalem est née au désert parce que notre fondateur, frère Pierre-Marie, est parti 2 ans dans le désert du Hogar à Tamanrasset, et c'est là où il a vraiment reçu cet appel et les choses se sont précisées pour lui. Et c'est il était très bien avec Dieu tout seul dans son désert, rien ne lui manquait, il a découvert combien la parole de Dieu et l'Eucharistie comblaient une vie. Mais il a vu combien la ville était un désert et avait besoin des moines aujourd'hui. Donc il a choisi de revenir en pleine ville pour mener cette vie monastique et, comme il le dit, pour creuser un oasis dans le désert de la ville, un oasis de communion, de fraternité, de joie.
frère Pierre-Marie, notre fondateur, a employé le mot écartèlement. C'est un mot très fort, un mot violent, on pourrait dire. Le premier écartèlement dont il parle, et que nous vivons en permanence, c'est l'écartèlement entre la recherche du silence et de l'intériorité et la recherche de l'accueil et de la rencontre avec les autres. Et puis il y a la tension entre frères et sœurs. Nous avons choisi d'avoir deux communautés distinctes, avec deux gouvernements distincts, deux modes de vie distincts, mais à la fois on a choisi de chanter et de vivre tous nos offices en commun et notre relation avec la ville en commun. Et donc ça veut dire que nos décisions, nous devons les prendre ensemble et pour autant distinctement dans chaque communauté.
Je pensais à la vie consacrée déjà depuis un certain temps, depuis l'âge de 15 ans en fait, mais je n'avais strictement aucune idée de l'endroit où ça pourrait être. De par ma famille dans laquelle on priait beaucoup, je me sentais attirée vers la prière, certainement une vie contemplative.
Donc toute la pédagogie ensuite de la formation dans la vie monastique s'appuie, je dirais, sur ce chemin de la parole de Dieu en nous, et aussi sur le chemin de la vie qui devient parole de Dieu pour le monde.
Thank you. This was just a little clip from the video on the Monastic Fraternity of Jerusalem in Paris, which one of the cases that are already in the website. Of course, talking about experience is very difficult. So we focused on the methodology, which is a big part of our project. And so I leave the field to Professor Monica Martinelli from the Catholic University of Milan to say a few words on the methodology of Genius Vitae.
Thank you, Mauro. Thank you very much. Good evening, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. As we heard, the project Genius Vitae maintains a tight anchoring in the concreteness of life experiences, and it is based on listening to these experiences lived by people who expose themselves to those two borders. And from there, those same people adopt a transformative approach, start processes that respect life and allow it to become a criterion of assessment. Each area or border of human and social life is studied in relation with innovative stories of organizations, associations, ONG, foundations, institutions that have gained knowledge in the field of human fragility and spirituality. They are stories born and grown up in different countries of the world. The methodology is composite. It is itself a process as the project. The ethnographic field observation is carried out by a research team with in-depth interviews, collections of life stories, participant observations, spending time in the life environment of the people involved. And this field observation is combined with a visual analysis, which is a visual anthropology. The production of documentaries focused on the direct narration by the main actors and contextual features is based on a double aspect. On the one hand, the artistic, and on the other, competence. Our video maker, Giovanni Panozzo, participates to the entire process of the field work together with the research team and chooses the appropriate images and composes also original music for each video. All these different languages together would communicate the depth of reality. In fact, the multidimensional approach, which is scientific and artistic, enables composite data and add valuable insights into the everyday life experience of those organizations and people. The output aims at expressing the life exposure, the life experience through the participants' eyes, their motivations, reasons, emotions, reflections, visions, worries, and hopes, with subsequent knowledge production coming from within, as Chiara said, a new living and embedded knowledge whose criterion is learning from life, operating at those two borders of social life. The process shapes at least 4 entry points, that is 4 points of view in each story. In the meantime, we can see some windows of the website about these 4 entry points. First, an ethnographic diary, that is a description and interpretation originating from the ethnographic observation process, and it is written by the research team of Genius Vitae, or in some specific cases by somebody involved by the team because of his or her particular direct experience in that field. Second, an original video narrating the story through the contexts, faces, words, and expressions of the key speakers and people involved in that story. Third, a document. It could be another brief video or a text, a gallery, and so on, produced by the same people belonging to the organization, which chooses its own contribution to be stored in Genius Vitae, focusing on a particular feature of the experience. And this document could be collected also collaborating with our team and our video maker. And fourth, a reinterpretation of the story, of the case study by an artist. Poet, writer, singer, painter, photographer, sculptor, video maker, with their own languages, enrich the general visual approach through its own properties and resilient strength. All the stories are stored in the website, which is not a mere collection of information, but it is, as Chiara said, the starting point of new processes in the field of training, education, and of birth of new networks among subjects who desire to contribute to supporting an original process of cultural elaboration on life from within life. And this can be done by sharing the geniality rooted in acting and living in the concreteness of fragility and openness to transcendence. These processes can be developed also through the organization of events, such as, for example, workshops, seminars, a summer school, one-day meeting, and the organization also of training experiences with the key players from the stories collected in the project. And these events can be focused on questions connected with the general topics of interest for Genius Vitae, such as, for example, the experience of spirituality, the different forms of poverty, the notion of living, the meaning of life rescue, as well as on more specific topics such as migration, human dignity, human suffering, moral dilemmas on birth and death, and so on. The dissemination of a new comprehension of human life is expected to shape a fruitful dialogue with the mainstream culture. And last but not least, Genius Vitae is a shared project. as this window on the website shows, the window on people involved. The project is coordinated by an operational team of researchers and a video maker and musician, and this team is responsible for the identification and realization of the stories. But the team, and this is very important, is supported by an international board of trustees and also an international advisory board. So as you can see, and we can say that Genius Vitae is an open team game, a work ever in progress, a generative process that is enriched by different people, experiences, points of view, and multidisciplinary contributions. So thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you, Professoressa Martinelli. And now we can watch a second clip from the Gandhi Charity Ethiopia.
Io sono venuta legalmente con l'aereo per studiare, per fare tutto quanto. Ho capito questa sofferenza quando mi sono immedesimata, quando l'ho vissuta direttamente. Se no prima per me non esisteva, non c'era, perché quando c'ero io non c'era questa situazione. Io facevo, prima lavoravo con un'azienda che era competitiva con l'IBM, allora, pensa un po' te. E mio padre era uno dei grandi politici eritrei che si chiamava, suo nickname, come si chiama, soprannome, era Gandhi, perché lui era un uomo di pace. Lui diceva: noi possiamo fare la rivoluzione pacifica. Tant'è vero, è per questo che io ho chiamato la mia associazione Gandhi. Poi piano piano nel 2003 abbiamo costruito la NGO Gandhi in Costa d'Avorio, perché poi sono andata in 12 paesi africani a cercare i disperati della terra, non solo eritrei. Allora un giorno qualcuno mi viene e mi dice: guarda che c'è uno sceicco che si chiama Sheikh Mohammed che ogni venerdì predica dicendo: nel Corano è scritto se tu uccidi anche solo una persona è come uccidere il mondo intero. E lui dice di non uccidere i nostri fratelli africani. Io voglio conoscere questa persona, l'ho cercata per mari e monti. A me chiamano molti profughi che dicono che sono sotto tortura, che gli stanno ricattando dicendo che gli prendono il rene o la cornea. Io non so come aiutarli, se lui può aiutarmi. Mi chiama, vado, dice: va bene, ti aiuto. Io dico: non ho fatto niente per gli altri, ma gli altri hanno fatto qualcosa per me, perché mi hanno insegnato tutte queste cose. Questo ne sono grata a tutti, lo dico sempre. Ringrazio tutti i profughi che attraverso la loro sofferenza mi hanno insegnato a essere parte di questo, a essere parte della compassione, a essere e a diventare anche uno con loro. Li ringrazio immensamente, veramente.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank especially Giovanni Panozzo, who is our video maker, who does wonderful videos for our story. So thank you, Giovanni. And now Davide Lampugnani from the Catholic University introduces the stories which have been already stored in the Genius Vitae website.
Thank you, Mauro, and good evening to everybody. Just a few words about the stories of Genius Vitae. As Monica said, Genius Vitae is a project that includes different activities and that is conceived as a process that follow different key steps. Clearly, Genius Vitae is a newborn project, and we can say that we too are taking our first steps through different borderlands, that of research and methodology, that of communication, that of education and training. At the same time, as you can see on the website geniusvitae.org, to date, our operational team has already collected 6 stories from different countries of the world. These stories are at the core of the Genius Vitae project. As Chiara explained, they are stories of organizations or communities that expose themselves to the borders of human fragility and of human transcendence. And these stories are the starting point for many reflections and analysis, but also for the creation of innovative educational projects. This is the main concept of Genius Vitae. Stories are the starting point. 2 of these stories have been chosen because of their special focus on the border of human fragility. The first story is that of Koinonia Community, which is an NGO established by Father Renato Chizzito Cesana, an Italian Combonian missionary, to rescue street children in Zambia, Kenya, and Sudan. With Genius Vitae, we have followed the daily work of volunteers and educators, and we have seen how street children that are excluded from everything, a family, an education, a future, can flourish if they are supported materially, for example, with new clothes or with food, but also if they are enabled as human people, with an education or with a job training, for example. The second story we collected is that of Gandhi Charity, an NGO established in 2003 by Ganesh Fessawa with the aim of helping African migrants and refugees. The video we saw some minutes ago is taken exactly from a long interview we realized with Ganesh for Genius Vitae. The full video is on the website. Ganesh described us how Gandhi Charity operates in very critical territories, such as refugees camps in Ethiopia, or, for example, in Egyptian prisons and in the Sinai desert. Ganesh told us how migrants are incarcerated, tortured, and even killed by human traffickers. Then, as you can imagine, it's very difficult to help them because often they are injured not only in body, but also in mind. Often they need not only a material help, but also a spiritual help. They need, for example, someone to listen to their stories, to their sufferings, and to their hopes. As you can imagine, these 2 stories are really intense, and it's not easy for us to collect the voices of former street children or of tortured migrants. At the same time, both these stories concretely show us what does it mean to talk about wasted lives, as Bauman said, or about the culture of waste, as Pope Francis warned us. And this is really, really, really important Two other stories have been chosen because of their special focus on the border of human transcendence. Here, the main question is, how can we deal with the structural openness to transcendence of human life in a society that is increasingly becoming secular and technocratic? This is the question. The first story comes from Italy, and it's the story of the Fraternity of Romena. We are in a Tuscan valley near an old Romanesque church, and here an Italian priest, Father Luigi Verdi, after a year of spiritual crisis, decided to create a place where spiritual travelers and seekers of our time could find a sort of staging post to pray and to regenerate. The fraternity then promotes meetings and courses for young and adult people. For example, they also created a group called the Group of Nine to help and to support families that have lost a child. With this group, they created a garden called the Garden of Resurrection, where each tree has the name of a son. The second story, in some aspects, is similar. Monastic fraternities of Jerusalem have been founded in 1975 by Father Pierre-Marie Delfieux after 2 years in the Sahara Desert, following in the steps of Charles de Foucauld. Father Pierre-Marie realized that contemporary cities were a sort of desert and that monastic communities could have represented a sort of spiritual oasis in the heart of modern cities. The first fraternity has been founded in Paris, and this is the community we described with Genius Vitae. The video we saw previously is taken exactly from the documentary we realized in Paris. Today, monastic fraternities are present in many cities, for example, in Florence, in Rome, in Warsaw, in Montreal. Brothers and sisters follow a traditional monastic rule, but at the same time, they also share some aspects of their life with urban people. For example, they work outside the monastery, in the city. Or, for example, they live all the daily liturgy with urban people. Clearly, these two stories, these two fraternities, are different in many aspects, but they are also both confronted with a similar issue, that of creating a sort of mediation between spiritual questions, and in particular Christian spiritual questions, and our modern secularized life, between our modern immanent frame and the human desire of transcendence. Finally, as you can imagine, in the last months, the explosion of the global pandemic has suspended our everyday life, but at the same time, in a certain way, has also required a reconfiguration of the program and of the field work of Genius Vitae. Still, following the leading idea of the project, we realized that even such a dramatic crisis, if properly interpreted, can generate new experiences and, above all, new knowledge about human life. For this reason, our last two stories are focused on the impact and on the experience of the COVID pandemic in Italy. In particular, we focused on what happened in the first half of 2020 in the province of Bergamo, one of the hardest hit territories in Italy. The first story is that of the Papa Giovanni XXIII Hospital in Bergamo. Here we interviewed doctors and nurses who worked in the intensive care units, and we asked them to share their personal and collective experience. They focused their stories on the relationship with patients affected by COVID, and above all, with the many people who died alone, just in few days, without a relative, without a word, without a memory. Even if doctors and nurses were trained to face death, we can say that this experience was really, really hard for many of them. It was an experience that has opened up many personal questions and reflections about the sense of impotence in the face of death, but also about the importance to give a right time to deal with death and with sorrow in our societies. The second and last story is that of the community of Nembro, a small town near Bergamo, where more than 200 of people died in few weeks between March and April. This is a very dramatic, but at the same time, really interesting story, because the community of Nembro, supported by the parish and the municipality, immediately activated to help people in need. Above all, Father Matteo Cella, the young parish vicar of Nembro, encouraged teenagers and young people to get involved in daily proximity actions and to read this crisis following a Christian spirituality. Then the crisis as an opportunity to truly live the relationship between the cross and the resurrection of Christ, the relationship between death and life. Then we can say that this story of Nembro is really interesting because the community tried to learn something even from this hard time they lived. They tried to give an answer to the pandemic. The third video we'll see in a moment is then exactly taken from the documentary we realized in Nembro with Father Matteo Cella, Father Antonio Guarnieri, and some young people from the parish. Thank you.
Thank you, Davide. We see the clip from Bergamo, from Nembro.
Non ci rendevamo ancora conto di quello che sarebbe successo di lì a poco. Ci sentivamo di un'impotenza terribile. Cosa sta succedendo? La disumanità della morte. Abbiamo smesso anche di suonare le campane. Non potevamo suonare le campane a morte 7, 8, 10 volte al giorno.
Ci siamo trovati dentro una situazione più grande di noi, molto dolorosa, è esploso il numero dei decessi, le ambulanze che andavano e venivano.
Torno alla seconda settimana di marzo si arrivava anche a 7, 8, 10 defunti, tenendo conto che la nostra comunità è una comunità di 11.000, 12.000 abitanti e certamente questo numero era spropositato.
Abbiamo incontrato il sindaco per raccontarci come si stava attivando il comune e per fargli una domanda: cosa possiamo fare noi in questo periodo? E lui ci ha risposto: abbiamo bisogno di giovani, abbiamo bisogno della vostra creatività.
L'emergenza Covid ha costretto le persone a prendere posizione. Alcuni purtroppo si sono espressi in maniera veramente pessima, alimentando le paure, le polemiche. Io credo che questi siano però una minima parte. L'altra parte, quella maggioritaria, è stata quella che ha sentito l'urgenza di dare il meglio di sé a tutti i livelli, a livello pratico, a livello intellettuale, a livello spirituale, facendo anche cose che nella normalità non gli era magari mai capitato di fare.
Che si sono trovati in questo periodo ad avere tanto tempo per riflettere su loro chi sono. E questo ha aperto dei vasi di Pandora con dei ricordi di esperienze pregresse, con delle scelte per il futuro da prendere, che si sono trovati ad affrontare da soli nelle loro case. Perché spesso i giovani, soprattutto quelli abituati a una vita frenetica, che si sono trovati ad avere tanto tempo di vuoto, si sono trovati a interrogarsi sul senso della loro vita.
Mi sembra che quello che celebriamo nella liturgia ci accada in queste situazioni più drammatiche nella vita reale e che alcuni cristiani l'abbiano saputo interpretare bene, altri non cristiani l'abbiano intuito, forse in un modo che in altre circostanze non avevano mai visto così, mai toccato con mano. Io credo che questo ci racconti però anche un'urgenza per la Chiesa e forse non solo per la Chiesa, che è l'urgenza di prendere sul serio la dinamica pasquale e quindi il luogo della presenza dei cristiani deve essere il luogo della presenza delle persone nella vita vera, autentica, e quindi deve essere la Chiesa che non ha paura di impattarsi con la realtà, di entrare nel vissuto reale della gente.
Desidererei una comunità cristiana più prossima, meno formale, più vicina, insomma, a questa gente. E questa gente ha bisogno di queste relazioni, ha bisogno di questa prossimità, di questa vicinanza.
Thank you. I would like to stress also that Giovanni Panozzo is not just a videomaker, but also a musician. So our musics are original, and we thank him for his job. Now we ask two members of the advisory board of Genius Vitae to make an intervention on fragility and on human desire. So I'm very happy to invite Natalie Beccart from the School of Theology and Ministry in Boston College to take the floor and make her speech. Natalie? Hi.
Yes.
Nice to meet you. Very happy to see you.
Thank you so much. Greetings.
How is the situation?
Greetings from Boston.
Okay. How is the situation in Boston?
Well, you know, it's not easy because the pandemic is increasing also, but people are trying to navigate in that. And at Boston College, they managed to keep the number of cases rather low. So we are lucky. So I am delighted to be with you today and to have received this great gift to be part of this adventure. So I really want to thank Mauro, Chiara, Monica, Benedetta, Davide, all this great team. And I have been asked to share something about learning from fragility. So I will do that with a PowerPoint I will share now with you. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
Okay, and my talk will be also based on my experience, because you have heard that experience is at the core of this project. But to talk about fragility, I just would like to highlight how Genius Vitae define fragility. It's one of the key words on the website. So fragility is where we meet the next other especially if hurt, little, poor, ill, or foreign. The fragile person provokes our individualism and selfishness, seeking a concrete answer. And I can tell that this project, that began before the pandemic, I really look at it now as a prophetic claim, because we can say that this global pandemic everywhere is really highlighting our common fragility, and we all have to learn how to assume that, how to navigate and discover a path of humanity within fragility. So this time of pandemic is truly a time of kairos, to lead back to existential questions, to reframe our vision of life together. And I really think that Genius Vitae is a great contribution to that, and can help many people, not only the academic world, but to learn how to discover what is I think the call of fragility. And what I have learned is that from human fragility, you learn paths of resilience, paths of encounter, and paths of humanization. And I can say that for me, as a Xavier sister, I entered this community in an Ignatian order in France in 1995, that my novitiate has truly been a kind of school of fragility. I was coming, from with a university background, working. Well, I have faced already some fragilities, but it's truly through my novitiate that I have discovered with the other novice who was with me, and we were very, very different, that the true encounter could happen when both of you recognize and meet through your fragilities and poverty. And so I would like to go deeper, not only from my experience, but how I have learned how this path of fragility opens paths of resilience, and how those who are facing those so difficult situations, like we hear in many cases related by Genius Vitae, in fact, open with creativity unique paths of resilience, but we can learn from each of them how to move forward. And during many years, I had a chance to journey with young people as youth minister, and especially with young migrants and refugees. And also during the Synod on Young People, where I was observer, among the observers, there were a good number of young people. And when you were listening to them in the Synod hall, they deliver their 4-minute speech, they were involved in the church. So you feel you have young people rather settled who are able to really collaborate with the Synodal Fathers. But one day with the other sister, we organized a lunch just to meet them more deeply and to listen to their story. And I was so touched and surprised that each of these young people, in fact, have faced so many difficult things in their life. Some terrorist attack, abuses, migration. And so from them, listening to the story and the story of faith, and also they were able to mention all the people who have been able to help them, I have really understood how fragility is opening paths of resilience that are paths of life and paths of gifts for the others, as they are able, when they are able to share their story. And during the synod, one of the speech that has really touched me, struck me, it was from Cardinal Michael Zerny, who is in charge of the migrant and refugee section at the Vatican, and he said, vulnerable young people on the move may serve as paradigmatic for the synod and provide an important key to the church mission from now on. Why? Being young, youth are in a not yet state. They are not yet settled in adult roles. Being migrants, their situation is in flux. They face huge and unsettling changes in this world, changing at an accelerating rate, as do all youth. But being migrants and vulnerable, their situation is more acute and the uncertainties more existential. So they really, you know, we can say they are a kind of laboratory of life, because now we are all facing this very changing world. We are all facing uncertainty, and migrants, and most of them are youth, by experiences how it's possible to come from a cultural background, a country, to leave this country just to live, because when you listen to them, they say we have no choice. If we want to live and to pursue our life, we have to go in another country. They really express the deep resources we can find in us to look at life at a very deep level that in ordinary life, when everything is going well, we don't really, we are not aware of. The second path, from what I have learned from fragility, I would like to evoke here is about the experience of palliative care and how what I have learned from people at the end of life. At the beginning of my community is very involved in palliative care in Paris at the Maison Médicale Jeanne Garnier. A good number of sisters are physicians, doctors, but also nurse or chaplain, and also I've worked a lot about the ethic of end of life. And at the beginning of my religious life, I was asked to be a cleaner in this palliative care house. So it was something rather new for me. And it was at the time where people were dying from HIV. And through this experience, you know, just at the bottom, to be with people at end of life, I have really experienced that facing the fragility of the others in that kind of place, you discover how the place of end of life is a true place of intensive life, because it's a place of relationship. And the secret, in fact, of life is encounters and relationship that fragility asks for. And I was very interesting to read in the Genius Vitae story about, you know, this hospital in Bergamo with the COVID, how they emphasize that. The hospital of Bergamo experience in particular showed the importance of relationships between the patients and their relatives, but also between them, the physicians and the nurses, in terms of care, as well as the memory of those who have died. And one of our Xavier sisters, Agata Zielinski, who is a philosopher, she also, through her novitiate and her experience of palliative care, then she has worked a lot as a professor of philosophy. She has incorporated what she has learned, you know, from the fragility and the vulnerability of people at the end of life. And it's very interesting to see how, you know, professor, academic integrate that kind of experience in their way of reflecting, of teaching. And so now she has written a lot about vulnerability. That is for her, you know, the fact that you are wounded, it is to be exposed, but she shows in her article and reflection how vulnerability is in fact open a capacity that is a relational virtue, an art of encountering, and drawing from Paul Ricoeur and his concept of solicitude. She explained that through the experience of fragility, in fact, we enter in a relationship of mutuality and reciprocity that at the beginning was an unequal relationship. So vulnerability is the common fund of humanity from which we enter into relationships simply, humbly, from human to human, she wrote. And I think that's the great challenge for many of our places, you know, not only the hospitals and the kind of relationship between physicians and people who are sick, but also in the church between ministers and the faithful, in the academic world between teachers and students. Only if we integrate and learn from fragility, we could enter in this kind of relationships based on mutuality. That means we are able not only to teach, but to learn from the others in this reciprocal relation to give and to receive. And the last path I would like to evoke, I had a chance to go 3 times in Algeria, you know, and where there is a very small church living among Muslim people. And you have probably heard about the monks of Tiberine and all the martyrs of this period who, during the terrorist dark years, were killed, and not only Christians, but many Muslims. And from their testimony, especially from the monks of Tiberine, you know, they had such a simple life immersed among the people. From a human point of view, you can say, you know, they didn't do so many things. Were they really here to evangelize? But they have just lived their life in the middle of the people of the village, of their village, day after day. So I have learned from this very fragile church that had to face terrorist attacks, but have chosen to settle in solidarity with the people, the virtue of patience, humility, and perseverance that in fact could lead to a Paschal journey. And we now, you know, they are beatified, and we have received a lot from them. So from this fragile church, I think we are learning, and we have to continue to learn to be a humble church that is a church of relationships, as Father Matteo Ciela told us in the case story of Nembro. We cannot be a church made of institutions, but a church made of real relationships. We cannot be a church that claims to be in territory, rather a church that lives, that merges with the real experience of the people. And to be this church of relationship, that was also a very strong claim from young people and from many people today. I have learned also, and I continue to learn at Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, where I get a specialization in ecclesiology, and I am doing a research on synodality, that we have to develop new ways to do theology, new methodologies in ecclesiology, and especially through ethnography and narrative approaches. So I'm very happy to do that here in resonance with the Genius Vitae project. And I would like to mention in France a very interesting experience in theology that has been opened by a Jesuit, Etienne Grieux. And now he has a good number of scholars I've followed his methodology and his way of doing to be at the school of the poorest and most fragile. And they have a good number of them have done doctorates, PhD, through a deep listening of poor people through interview. And from that, they have drawn a theological reflection. And so I really think that's how we could learn, you know, from the poorest and the most fragile, how to be a synodal church. That is the call for today, that we have also listened to very deeply at the Synod on Young People, where in fact listening to the others and listening to their fragilities, you hear the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. And this generative approach, coming from a generative listening, help us to envision the church in emergence. That means a church constantly being born and starting anew in what we can call an ecclesiogenesis. And my conclusion will be that learning from all of that, I'm truly convinced that we need to continue to learn new ways of teaching, because all this takeaway, you know, from those who have been working and learning from fragility, they have heard how it is the meeting of the others through an integral approach, very concrete and embodied with incarnation. And we need to have this kind of embodied teaching connected to life that call for integral approach and integral pedagogies through transformational process based on the experience. And what I have learned with the new generation of young people nowadays is that we need to implement more deeply formation, action, learning by doing, that combine, you know, those different approaches to help to develop not only knowledge, but skills and attitudes. And now those who are working in education and teaching talk about, in French, savoir devenir. That means how to become in this world of uncertainty. So thank you for the Genius Vitae project. That is truly a very promising project.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalie. Your intervention was fantastic because show concretely the direction Genius Vitae is trying to follow. And there are, of course, so many aspects to be deal with. And Genius Vitae and the website is simply a tool to develop and to go deep in these questions. Now, before listening Ilaria Schneider, I think that we have another clip from Bergamo as well.
Questa esperienza l'ho raccolta quando sembrava che tutto fosse più roseo, più vicino a una soluzione, anche se c'erano dei segnali di allarme, eccetera. Adesso che siamo da capo in una situazione analoga, non sai più cosa pensare, in realtà. Ho la fortuna di avere lo studio vicino alla mia abitazione e di conseguenza facevo questo tragitto mascherato in questa specie di deserto, non incontravi nessuno, la gente ti scansava e arrivavo fino alla porta conosciuta, che era quella del mio studio, per cui entravo, mi mancavano tutte quelle peculiarità che uno ha, l'abitudine del caffè, il giornale al bar, le due chiacchiere magari che non riguardano assolutamente il tuo lavoro, ma che scambi con le solite persone che incontri, per cui c'è una socialità che è venuta completamente, che è scomparsa in sostanza. Per cui mi sono trovato in studio con un grande disagio e non sapevo cosa fare. Ho letto fortunatamente, perché non si riusciva neanche a trovare il materiale necessario per lavorare, che era tutto chiuso. E ho cominciato un po' a pasticciare, diciamo, quasi in maniera un po' informale e irrazionale. Un po' il colore della cera, che ha questo calore un po' tiepido perché è un materiale organico. È uscito una specie praticamente di paesaggio quasi della pianura. Mi sono ricordato che da ragazzo c'erano degli emigranti del sud che venivano a Milano, e attraverso tutta la pianura che si incontra prima di entrare in città, uno diceva all'altro: guarda, un sole malato, perché venendo da geografie dove il sole aveva questa solarità, questa immensità, arrivati a Milano, allora poi c'era anche molta più nebbia, c'erano anche più industrie intorno alla periferia della città, il sole aveva questo aspetto di malattia, no? Per cui questa frase, che mi è ritornata casualmente in memoria, mi ha portato a fare questa serie di opere che diventavano una sorta di paesaggio. Questo fatto mi consolava anche in un certo senso, no? Questa memoria di cose che potevano essere successe, che riaffioravano come dei frammenti poetici. Se siamo ancora in grado di emozionarci o di spaventarci, perché anche lo spavento è un'emozione, anche la paura è un'emozione, come la speranza. Se siamo in grado, vuol dire che siamo ancora uomini vivi, vuol dire che abbiamo ancora qualcosa dentro di noi che ci permette di comunicare con gli altri.
Great, thank you very much. Now we have Ilaria Schneider, who is also a member of our advisory board. She comes from the University of Notre Dame, the Kellogg Institute for International Studies, and she talks about learning from human desire. Thanks, Ilaria.
Thank you, Mauro, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I'm glad because some of what I'm going to say today resonates very much with what have been said so far, so I'm glad for that. In the Catholic experience, the human person is the subject and the ultimate end of the development process. Integral human development implies that development cannot be restricted to economic growth and material conditions alone, but must foster the growth of each person and the whole of each person. As elaborated by John Paul II, I quote, "Development which is merely economic is incapable of setting man free. On the contrary, it will end by enslaving him further." End of quote. According to this definition, human development involves the person's inner dimension, her transcendence and religious sense. As reported in the encyclical letter Sollicitudo Rei Socialis, I quote, "Development which is not only economic must be measured and oriented according to the reality and vocation of man, seen in his totality, namely according to his interior dimension." End of quote. This is based upon the fact that man has two different characteristics, as said in the Catholic Social Doctrine Compendium. He is a material being linked to this world by his body, and is a spiritual being open to transcendence. End of quote. My colleague Clement Sedmak discusses the person's inner life in relationship to development when describing the soul as home to one's deepest desire. He explains, I quote, "The soul as inner space can be depicted as active agent, as well as backdrop where the events of life are staged and come to pass," end of quote. It is in the soul that one's emotions, judgments, attitudes, memories, and beliefs exist, which facilitate the expression of agency. The inner dimension of development is described in Caritas in Veritate when Benedict XVI explained, "The question of development is closely bound up with our understanding of the human soul. Whatever affects the dignity of individuals and peoples, such as authentic development, cannot be reduced to a technical problem. If reduced in this way, development would be emptied on its true content, and this would be an act of betrayal of the individuals and peoples whom development is meant to serve," end of quote. Thus, technocratic approaches which conceive of development in terms of material dimensions are insufficient. Rather, the challenges of development can be addressed adequately through the transformation of each person. How this transformation from technical to human development happens. In the past years, the principal aim of my research has been to disaggregate essential elements of this human flourishing that human dignity entails, such as personal freedom, quality of relationships, trust, hope, courage, and faith, and to identify the concrete implications of a commitment to human dignity in the practice of development. In my presentation today, I will describe the experience of a group of Ugandan women that in the midst of poverty, struggle, and consequent lack of affection to their own life, rediscovered their own value and inner desire and became agents of change in their communities. In the early 90s, Rose Buzinga, a Ugandan nurse, began working with HIV/AIDS patients in Chireka, a slum in Kampala, Uganda. Home to approximately 68,000 people, Chireka is known for its population composed of internally displaced persons from northern Uganda. Many of the displaced women residents had suffered intense trauma before arriving to Chireka. They had been kidnapped and forced to commit violence. Others had been victims of rape, contracted HIV, and were rejected also by their families. Rose began her work with the women by providing antiretrovirals and medical treatment. After several years, however, the standard interventions were proving ineffective. Many patients were rejecting the medicines or refusing the treatment. As a result of the violence and trauma they had endured, the women reflected feelings of fear, shame, and isolation. One woman described her situation. "I felt I was not fitting anywhere. I had to fear. In fact, I was traumatized." The women's woundedness was not only physical but also interior, where medicines could not reach. One woman described, "You know, telling people my problem is not easy. I laugh with you, I play with you, I share with you, but inside my heart is not easy to get. That is my problem. I felt like I did not want to give someone my burden, and I wanted to fight alone." Through spending time with the women, Rose realized their depth of psychological and spiritual suffering. She recognized that antiretrovirals and medical treatment were insufficient to the women's healing, and that more fundamentally, they needed to rediscover a reason for living, to rediscover their own heart. Rose began to consider what was lacking in her approach. She recalls questioning, who are these people to me, and who am I to them? She asked what the women needed beyond medicine and began listening to their aspirations, needs, longings. She began to discern a common cry, a cry for love and affirmation, for something or someone to give meaning to their existence. She came to recognize the reality described by a patient of hers. If you are sick, though they have given you everything, if there is no love, you will never respond to the treatment. But when someone who is attending to you show you all that love, you respond very fast. End of quote. In Catholic social teaching, the human person's profound desire for meaning is described in terms of heart. St. Augustine treats the restless heart of the human person who longs for God. Benedict XVI explains that nothing finite can satisfy the human heart and its infinite desire, which is realized in God alone. The heart is the place of the human person wherein we locate the aspirations for love, truth, and justice. The treatment of heart is related to the experience of love described by the economist Flavio Comin. I quote, "Love is about how we look at ourselves and how we perceive ourselves as object of value. Love is also about how we look at other people. Thus, love is about self-recognition and about mutual recognition." End of quote. The experience of the Ugandan women show that starting from the shame and isolation, their hearts struggle to recognize their value and express a longing for love and for meaning. It is what we call an encounter, a quality of relationship that stirs the heart of the person and awakens her to an awareness of her value and a newfound sense of hope. The Ugandan women describe their relationship with Rose as an encounter. One woman explains, "Rose looked at me and told me, 'Vicky, you can do it. You just need to find hope. You have a value, and this value is great.' I was silent while Rose kept looking at me. Only these words she pronounced, but the eyes that look at me, the eyes spoke much more than her mouth. She looked at me with eyes that invited me to believe them, as she were telling me there is something above you in which you must place your hope." End of quote. This experience brings to light several key aspects of encounter. First, encounter is a personal invitation. Rose calls the women by name. Second, the encounter invites each woman to rediscover her value and inherent dignity. Third, the rediscovery of one's value and of her human desires. A person can re-envision her future with hope, not limited by the confines of suffering. In this way, the encounter is a gaze of mercy. The experience of encountering the awakening of one's heart brings to light the role of the inner life of the soul in development. Rose recognizes that in realizing the woman recognizes that in realizing their dignity, they find strength to endure physical difficulties because they rediscover a meaning for living. Rose explains, "It is very easy to confuse or substitute the human person with what we are doing for him or her. You reduce the person to a project. Even you can reduce her for a sickness." End of quote. Awakened to one's own dignity, a person becomes aware of the dignity of their neighbor, and that the dignity is shared, bound in relationship. Pope Francis explains, I quote, "Everything is interconnected, and this invites us to develop a spirituality. of that global solidarity which flows from the mystery of the Trinity, end of quote. One Ugandan woman explains, if you don't love yourself, you cannot love the others. The women recognize that they can witness and bear responsibility for the life of others. Women who had refused the medication have then initiated new socioeconomic enterprises, built 2 schools, and sponsored fundraising efforts for vulnerable populations abroad. They have been flourishing. Hence, HIV positive women living in a slum in Africa became the happiest people I have ever seen in my life. Encounter presents an invitation to share in the journey of development and flourishing. And this invitation is open to the freedom of each person. Taking into account the inner dimension of development entails also a recognition of the freedom of the person to accept or reject the encounter. Those who accept the invitation, wondering what does it mean for me, chose to enter into a relationship of belonging. The person grows, becomes more herself, becomes a unique subject and protagonist of his life in a relationship, a relational dynamic. In this sense, accompaniment entails mutuality. Rose exhibits an openness and willingness to grow with and learn from, and makes possible the experience of belonging. One woman described, Rose is not in front or behind. She moves in the middle. She's not the leader. She stays within and we learn together. By affirming the person's dignity, encounter catalyzes the inner state of the person, her freedom, awakening agency. It is a transformative event in the person's life. We can use the metaphor of a spark to describe the encounter through which a person becomes conscious of her value, aspirations, and desires. As Kapuscinski wrote, I quote, "We will constantly be encountering the new order, who will slowly emerge from the chaos and tumult of the present. We should seek dialogue and understanding with the new order. The experience of spending years among remote others has taught me that kindness toward another being is the only attitude that can strike a chord of a humanity in the other. Who will this new order be? What will our encounter be like? What will we say, and in what language? Will we be able to listen to each other, to understand each other?" End of quote. I believe that a project like Genius Vitae is crucial in helping discover and disseminate experiences in which these dynamics of flourishing occurs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilaria. Thank you for your intervention. Okay, I think that we are at the conclusions of our meeting. I would like just to make a few final remarks and to share with you, all of you who were with us this evening, our ideas for future. Thank you for being here today. I invite you to visit the website, which is available in the network, in the internet, so you can see all the stories and start using the website. Maybe you have realized that Genius Vitae is an ambitious project. We don't have all the ideas clear. We have many hopes. We are convinced of the goodness of the idea, but we have a lot of challenges in front of us. First of all, the epistemological challenge. In the last meeting with the Catholic University, Pope Francis invited the universities to start new epistemological process, because if we assume the epistemology, which is the basis of our contemporary knowledge, it's very hard to challenge the conclusions which comes from this epistemology. So Genius Vitae is an attempt to follow the Francisco indication. It's very clear that this epistemological challenge is very hard, is certainly bigger than us. But together, I think that we can try at least to deal with it and to do some new steps forward. And the second challenge is the educational one, which is follow from the epistemological, of course. How to diffuse this new knowledge of life, how to deal with the youngster, with the professionals, with people working in ordinary life, and how to disseminate the knowledge that we gather into the website. These are the two main challenges that Genius Vitae will try to deal with. And we all know that they are very difficult, but nevertheless, we like to try to deal with. The next steps, I would say we have 4 steps in front of us, and I would like to present them and to share them with all of you. First, the first step is to gather new stories and make the website attractive, rich, and visible, of course. This is the basic step. We present nowadays the website with 6 stories, and our ambition is to go on reaching 10, 15, 20 stories, we will see. And of course, we are very interested in your contribution in finding new stories to be put into the website. Of course, it's not just a matter of a quantity, it's a matter of a quality. Every story must be chosen for a specific reason, a specific aspect of life, which may be enlightened by that particular story. So the first step is to enrich and to make visible the website. The second step is to establish, to create a real global network for Genius Vitae. We have already the people which are part of our boards are from many countries. Of course, we are interested in having correspondence for Genius Vitae everywhere. So I ask you to contribute us, to help us to create this global network and to keep it together. Of course, global Genius Vitae is not something which is led from us. Is a project, is a cooperative project. It was started in Italy, of course, but we like to share with everyone interested in the project and to develop the project with them. So the second step is the establishment of this global network of Genius Vitae people all around the world. The third step is to push forward our comprehension of life. We already seen from Natalie Beckard and Ilaria Schneider interventions that the meaning of collecting cases, of going close to the concreteness of life is to change our comprehension of life and questioning the mainstream which is all around us. So of course, the Genius Vitae has this ambition to be able to go in depth in our comprehension of life and to be able at a certain point to question the mainstream. Of course, Genius Vitae is taught to organize meetings, seminars, conferences, and we are ready to collaborate with all of you to develop this third step. And the fourth step, the last step, is to develop a new initiative in the educational field. That is how to use this material that we collect in the website, how to create new forms of education, which may be thought as complementary to the institutional one, to be offered to youngsters, to professionals, to all the people who may be interested in having a different approach to life and to its knowledge. Of course, these 4 steps are very ambitious, are very difficult. And so we are looking for people who would like to participate to this adventure. As I told before, this is not a closed club, it's an open club. And we are ready to collaborate and to cooperate with all of those who want to participate. So today we have chosen to have a closed session without interaction, because this was a presentation of the program, of the project. You have our email, so you can write to us and we can establish the relationship with you. And we hope that Genius Vitae may result useful for your work and especially interesting for your research activity or whatsoever. So we are very happy to have had you here this evening, and we hope to see you soon on the website, certainly, in the internet, but also face-to-face all around the world. Okay, thank you very much, and all the best for Genius Vitae and all of you. Bye-bye. Thank you.